Welcome, everyone, to the Community Corner. This is Pervin Patel. I have Neil Benson on the other side of the planet with us. It is extremely late or early, depending on how you want to look at it. Neil, I hope you're wide awake and ready to go. We're going to be talking about your often presentation at different user groups and conferences, successfully implementing Dynamics 365 using Scrum.
Thanks, Pervin. It's great to be with you today. Welcome, everybody, to this session on Dynamics 365 using Scrum. So my name is Neil Benson. I'm really pleased to be with you this afternoon. My mission is to help every Microsoft customer and partner successfully implement Dynamics 365 using Scrum. I'm really lucky. I've been a Microsoft MVP since 2009, and I've been working with CRM software since 1999 and with Dynamics CRM since 2006. I'm also a certified Scrum Master with the Scrum Alliance and a professional Scrum Master and a professional product owner with Scrum.org. So I've been practicing Scrum for about 10 years with Dynamics CRM and 365. There's lots of different ways to contact me. There's different social media channels. My email address and Twitter handle are there as well. Please feel free to reach out if you do have any questions, or if you want to know more, you can follow my blog and my podcast. So today we're going to cover 4 main topics. I would love you to, by the end of this session, know how Scrum applies to Dynamics 365 projects. I'm going to share the story of my first ever Scrum with Dynamics 365 project, so you can see how I got started, and hopefully that'll inspire you to get started as well. I'm going to be showing you how to explain Scrum to someone else in 5 minutes by explaining it to you in 5 minutes. There's just 2 slides I've got on that, and hopefully you can learn all the basics of Scrum in just a couple of minutes and be able to share that with other people as well. I'm going to be describing some of the benefits of Dynamics 365 when it's implemented using Scrum, both from the point of view of a Microsoft customer and a Microsoft project team member as well. And then finally, I'm going to be providing 26 expert tips for succeeding with Scrum. So we're going to walk through the components of the Scrum framework, and I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to maximize the chances of success with each of those when you're working on a Dynamics project. So first of all, let's have a look at my first Scrum project. This was back in 2008 with a client called the Premier Medical Group. So it holds a special place in my heart. Premier Medical Group, they are an organization, about 800 people. We had about 500 or 600 Microsoft Dynamics 365 or CRM back then, CRM users. They diagnose the injuries of people who've been involved in an accident to help support their insurance claim.
I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
Okay. So essentially, they're an important part of the ambulance chasing industry. This is Debbie. She is the operations director at Premier Medical Group. So it's her job to chase the operations staff, who chase the ambulances, who chase the lawyers, who chase the casualties. Debbie engaged my CRM consultancy to implement Microsoft Dynamics CRM 4.0, and following the Dynamics SureStep methodology, we analyzed all of Premier Medical Group's requirements, and it took about 6 weeks before we published the functional requirements document, the FRD. That was about 600 pages of detailed requirements. Every entity, every field was in there, every business process, every report, every security role, and everything else. I thought it was awesome. We spent a lot of long nights producing this thing, and I thought it was complete, and it was going to be great. Debbie's reaction wasn't quite what I was hoping for. In fact, it was the opposite of what I was hoping for. She thought it was filled with jargon. There was lots of Microsoft Dynamics CRM terms and phrases that she didn't understand. She didn't know what an entity was or an attribute was, and we weren't using enough of her organization's internal business language. Lots of the requirements were ambiguous. They could be interpreted by different people in different ways. And that's just a common fact with trying to write things down in the English language. None of us can write in such a way that anybody else can completely interpret what we're trying to convey in exactly the same way that we meant it. And she also felt that some of the requirements were missing or incomplete. Even though it was 600 pages long, there was subtlety in the requirements that we had missed and that Debbie felt that should have been in there. So we were a little bit disappointed. And the worst of it was that we had converted that entire requirement specification, and we'd based our project plan on that. So even our commercial statement of work was going to be based on this as well. And at that point, we almost lost the project. Debbie wanted to see some software early. She wanted to be able to adapt it to changing requirements through the course of the project. And she didn't want either of us to become slaves to the specification or to the plan. She wanted her team to be more involved throughout the course of the project, not just doing workshops up front and doing testing at the end, but to be able to see it and give feedback throughout the course of the project. What Debbie wanted was Scrum, but she didn't know how to ask for it. And when I described Scrum to Debbie, she was immediately on board. So we pitched it to her board of directors and we got the project approved. I've been using this slide for a little while. This is, if you know anything about rugby, these are two of the greatest rugby teams on earth. This is Ireland versus Australia. I'm Irish, living in Australia, so it's a little bit contentious, but one of these teams is the best Scrum team in the world. Whenever we pitched the Scrum methodology to the board of directors at Premier Medical Group, they were a little bit skeptical at first, because one of the things about Scrum is we don't really work to the requirement specification, and our statement of work is pretty different as well. So I would advise you, if you're going to check into Scrum, have a think about the implications, particularly if you're contracting with somebody else, and what that means for the kind of contract that you want. It's very different to a traditional systems integration contract because we don't have that fixed requirement specification. We were going to deliver prototype software for Debbie. So rather than waiting probably 12 months or more for a finished piece of software, we're going to deliver software every couple of weeks. Debbie loved the sound of that. And instead of fighting over the remote control, we were going to put Debbie in charge of all the requirements. So it's going to be up to Debbie to describe her requirements in her language, and we'd interpret those and then implement software accordingly and come back to Debbie every couple of weeks to check it out. So I formed a team of Dynamics CRM superheroes, including a Scrum Master from another Microsoft partner, and that we collaborated with on the project. And that was a great learning for me, was whenever my team didn't have any experience of Scrum, hire in some outside help. There are lots of good consulting Scrum Masters available. And if this is your first time trying to apply Scrum to a project, hiring in outside help is a great idea. So after 39 sprints, it's about a year and a half, we built a fantastic Microsoft Dynamics CRM system for their contact center that scheduled appointments for lots of injured parties to come and see a doctor, get a diagnosis to support their medical claim. We had an offline synchronizing client for doctors built on SharePoint, and a fantastic set of BI reports as well. In fact, the whole system really uplifted Premier Medical Group's ability to serve a lot more customers in lots of parts of the United Kingdom. And in fact, just as we went live, Nomura, one of the investors in Premier Medical Group, sold Premier Medical Group to Capita, a much bigger public company, in June 2010. And one of the reasons they cited for the acquisition was a fully integrated, IT-led medical reporting system. That's what we had built on Dynamics CRM using Scrum. So a very proud moment for me and my team, and for everybody at Premier Medical Group as well. So that was my first project back in 2008, and we finished up in 2010. A great first Scrum project. But what is Scrum? So if you're sitting there wondering what Scrum is, I'll run you through a couple of slides so you get some background in the Scrum framework. So Scrum is a framework in which we solve complex problems while delivering valuable products. That's the definition from the Scrum Guide. The Scrum Guide is about a 20-page manual on how to use Scrum. And it's important to note that Scrum is a framework. It's not a prescriptive methodology. For example, it says you need to manage your requirements in a backlog, but it doesn't tell you how to write requirements or provide any step-by-step instructions for managing them. In fact, there aren't any real software engineering practices described in the Scrum Guide at all. You have to complement your Scrum framework with those engineering practices. And knowing which ones to choose and which ones are valuable in your project is a fine art. Scrum is one of the frameworks from the Agile software development, born out of the Agile Manifesto. It was published in 2001. Basically, a bunch of software development luminaries got together, decided there was a few things wrong with the industry, and that there was 12 principles that would put it back on track. These are known as the Agile principles. And while there's lots of different Agile approaches today, they're all underpinned by the values and the principles of the Agile Manifesto. Here's how complex the landscape looks today for the agile frameworks. Scrum is that blue circle in the middle, down towards the bottom right a little bit. Um, it's got a bunch of different agile practices in it. And then we have things like design thinking, large-scale Scrum, um, the scaled agile framework. We've got Crystal and DSDM as predecessors to Scrum. We've got things like product development. Kanban is an alternative. Lots and lots of different agile frameworks and practices within the agile landscape. And like I said, knowing which of these to choose and add to your Scrum project is worth exploring. So here's Scrum on one slide. We start off with a product owner. This is the person who's got the vision for the CRM software that we're going to implement. The development team are the people with cross-functional, self-organizing team skills that they're going to implement the software. And they are coached by a Scrum Master. Everybody else in the project is a stakeholder. Stakeholders aren't really part of Scrum. They sit on the sidelines. We capture all of our feedback in something known as the product backlog that I described a moment ago. So this is Debbie's long list of prioritized requirements. And in Scrum, that product backlog is implemented in a time-boxed iteration of work called a sprint. And during a sprint, we start that off with a sprint planning workshop. And the purpose of the sprint planning workshop is to decide which slice of the product backlog we're going to implement in that sprint. So that's the sprint backlog. We meet up every day. We have a 15-minute sync in which we figure out what we're going to do for the day. And towards the end of the sprint, when the software has been developed, we review that with our stakeholders, principally with the product owner, but we also invite other stakeholders along as well to see the finished increment and provide us their feedback. And then the team goes off to inspect and adapt its own processes in something called the sprint retrospective. And that's how we improve ourselves sprint over sprint. And at the end of the sprint, we should have some usable software that's ready to ship into production. And we keep going sprint over sprint for as long as there's valuable work left to do in the product backlog and that value being created is greater than the cost of the project team, then we keep going. And you can go for as long as you like in a Scrum project. All of that is underpinned by empiricism, which is based on the empirical process control theory. And what that says is software development is a little bit unpredictable. You can deliver the same types of inputs, which are requirements, for example, but you get different outputs depending on how those are implemented. So empiricism is this idea of inspection and adaptation. And those are two of the Scrum values that we use to make sure that we're controlling the outputs by inspecting them frequently and then adapting our processes because we can't control our inputs. Transparency is the other major hallmark of Scrum. So we're being transparent with our stakeholders. And then courage, commitment, focus, openness, and respect are the other 5 core values of Scrum. So what are the benefits for Dynamics 365 customers of using Scrum? Well, these are some of the benefits that I've found in my project teams with my clients that I wanted to share with you. So first of all, I think Scrum delivers better Dynamics 365 software than a traditional approach. It delivers software that more closely meets your users' most valuable requirements. One of the things about Scrum is we don't spend any time analyzing stuff that's not going to get implemented. So sometimes in a traditional project, we'll do a big analysis phase and we analyze everything, every potential requirement, even though we know some of it won't be implemented. In Scrum, we don't do that. We leave the analysis until we're just about to implement it. So we never waste time analyzing and designing software that we're not going to implement. I think Dynamics 365's got a faster release cadence when we're using Scrum because we can deliver a first version of the software much earlier than a traditional project. With Premier Medical Group, they weren't going to see an initial version for about a year or so, but using Scrum, we were able to deliver that initial version within a couple of months. So one of the great things about that is that the benefit realization happens much earlier. If you can get users using the software in a couple of months, and there's some value in doing that, then you don't have to delay that value realization for a year or more that you might have with another approach. Scrum projects have a higher return on investment, partly because of that benefits realization happening earlier, but I also find that they cost quite a bit less, maybe 30 to 40% less than projects following a traditional methodology. Scrum embraces early feedback from your stakeholders, and delivers values collaboratively and with them, so there's greater involvement and satisfaction. So I think users are much more engaged in a Scrum project than with a traditional project, and they enjoy the process, they enjoy being part of it. Number 5, greater visibility and confidence. Project sponsors and stakeholders have greater visibility of the project's progress, and they can see the risks and issues. They can see our Scrum board and how stories are moving across the Scrum board, getting towards done. And we demonstrate the working software to them every couple of weeks. So they're much more on board with the project, much more comfortable with it. And if you're ever getting audited, then the auditors can be on board as well. And number 6 is about less risk. That Scrum project offers less risk because of those frequent opportunities for inspection and adaptation. That ensures we're building the right solution. We're never getting too far off track. We're only a couple of weeks away from another review session, so we can make sure we're building the best possible software. And for project team members, there's 4 benefits there as well. The first one, number 7, is greater accountability. Scrum teams are self-organizing, so the team members have got control over the work that they're doing and how they do it. Whereas in a traditional project, there might be an architect who's designed the system and a project manager who's assigning everybody all the tasks. In Scrum, that architectural responsibility is shared across the team, and there's no project manager assigning work. The team assigns work to themselves. If I've got capacity, I go up and get some more work, and I get to decide how to implement it. That's much more empowering for a technical person than being told what to do all the time. Similarly, we also get to work together very closely with our users rather than working through a requirement specification. I can go up and ask any of my users for feedback on any of the features I'm building or clarification on any of the requirements. That's a really nice way to work as well. So being close to our customer, being close to our end users is much more liberating than working remotely through a requirement specification. Number 9, we measure what matters in Scrum. There's only a couple of ways of tracking our progress in Scrum, and those are very much team-based. So we have a different set of metrics used to estimate complexity and track our progress and make decisions that I think are much more accurate. And because they're team-based, I don't feel the pressure and the scrutiny as an individual contributor that I do whenever it's a traditional methodology. All of that leads to more fun. I think working on Scrum projects, I've sustained Scrum teams for 2 or 3 years at a time, and people really enjoy working that way. There's a lot less pressure. It's very sustainable and satisfying and rewarding. So self-management puts those decisions into your hands that would otherwise be made by some manager, and people can keep going on a Scrum project for a long time because they're having lots of fun. So let's take a look at each of the Scrum roles, each of its artifacts and each of the events, and I'll give you some of my tips for maximizing the chances of success when you're using Scrum on a Dynamics project. So first of all is our product owner. So if I'm working for a Microsoft consultancy, the product owner is typically somebody in the client's organization. They're the leader who's going to provide the vision for Dynamics 365 in their organization. They need to have sufficient decision-making authority and the good people skills to be able to grab together all those competing requirements from different departments and different groups of users. So they need to have some industry expertise and understand how their organizations in their industry run, and also the organization itself. They need to have a couple of years experience in the organization to know about its business process and its users. They need to understand the stakeholders and some of the politics at play there, and they need to know the user base as well. Who's going to be using it? Where are they going to be using it? What types of scenarios do they need to use Dynamics in as well? And finally, they're accountable. They're somebody who's committed to the project. They enjoy taking on responsibility for it. And lastly, and hardest of all, I think, is that they're sufficiently available for the project team. So finding somebody senior enough who's available enough is a real trick in the projects that I've worked on, and one of the hardest to find. So a couple of tips for you. First one is to use proxy product owners. So these are people that the real product owner delegates some of their responsibilities to in order to help out. That could be a business analyst to help write some of the requirements. It could be a test analyst to accept some of the user stories on behalf of the product owner. Or there could be some kind of project manager who's helping to manage the status of the project, who's managing risks and issues on behalf of that product owner as well. But one thing I would avoid is to never ever have a committee of product owners. When there's a joint decision-making authority, it's really tough. Scrum works really well when there's a single person acting as a product owner. They get to make the decisions. That tends to make the decision-making cycles nice and short. We get a clear course of action to take. When we have to make a decision through a committee, quite often we have to wait for that committee to get together. They have to evaluate some options. They might not be able to decide straight away. They might go away for more information, and that really slows down the decision-making process. So although we might have several people helping the product owner, there should only ever be one clear product owner so we know exactly who to go to for our source of requirements. Next up is the development team. A development team in Scrum is comprised of developers, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all .NET developers. These are anybody involved in turning ideas into software. So the people in the development team could have a background in business analysis, Dynamics 365 configuration, and system administration. They could be .NET developers. They could be systems integrators who can work with Azure services to help us integrate Dynamics with other systems. They could be data migration experts. They could be quality assurance experts as well. And part of what Scrum requires is a good cross-functional team. You should have all those skills in your development team. That doesn't necessarily mean that each individual needs to be able to do everything, but that as a team, collectively, you don't need to go outside to anybody else to meet the requirements. And that team is self-organizing. So they get to decide themselves who's going to do what they're going to do, and how they're going to achieve it. So a couple of tips for your development team. Make sure they embrace that feeling of collective ownership. As far as possible, they should understand all of the system and get involved in the analysis, design, development, testing, and deployment. We refer to that as T-shaped skills. So the T, the horizontal bar, represents the fact that you should know a little bit about everything. And then the vertical bar in the T represents the fact that you should have some specialization somewhere to make your contribution to that team. And in terms of the size of the development team, the Scrum Guide, and I agree, 3 to 9 committed developers works well. If you have less than 3 people, even if it's a small project, you probably don't have all the skills that you need in order to turn those ideas into software. So 3 people is probably the minimum. And once it gets to 9 people, any more than that, and communication and coordination is really difficult across the team. So it begins to fall down a little bit. So at that stage, if you're looking at 10 developers in your team, then I would recommend you run 2 Scrum teams. And in my current project at the moment, we have 12 people split up into, we call them squads. So we have 2 squads of 6, and we have a Scrum Master who coaches both of those squads. When I say committed developers, what I mean there is that they're solely committed to your Dynamics 365 project. Scrum doesn't really work so well when some of the developers who are on your project are also doing business as usual kind of support work for a previous system that they were working with. So I don't mind working with part-time people who I know their hours are 30 hours a week or 20 hours a week. That's awesome. But when I have developers who are assigned to the project, but who keep getting distracted by other projects or other work, then that really doesn't work so well. So make sure that you've got the commitment of those people's time to your Dynamics 365 project. Next up is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is an expert coach. They understand the Scrum framework really well, and they're there to serve your product owner, your development team, and your organization by helping make sure everybody understands Scrum, embraces it, and can apply it to your project. I don't think you can take a 2-day Scrum training course and become a Scrum Master. You probably need to have spent a year or so working in a Scrum team before you can be a Scrum Master. A great coach is another aspect of a good Scrum Master, and that means that they ask leading questions instead of providing definitive answers all the time. They know when to hold the team's hand and when to let them run free, and they've got good people skills in resolving any interpersonal conflicts that come up. A couple of recommendations for Scrum Masters. Like I did on my Premier Medical Group project, we hired an expert. So Paul Fox was my first Scrum Master that I worked with. Paul was great. He'd run Scrum for a couple of years before I met him, and he really helped coach our team along. So don't be afraid to hire in an outside expert, even if you're a Microsoft partner, going out to the community and hiring an independent Scrum Master or collaborating with another Microsoft partner. If you're a Microsoft customer, certainly, even if you have an internal development team, I'd recommend looking at some independent help from an expert Scrum Master. Don't just send somebody, particularly one of your Scrum Masters, on a Scrum course and ask them to come back and coach your team. That's probably unlikely to succeed. And you can, if you need to, combine some of the roles. So, like I said a moment ago, in my current project, we've got a Scrum Master working across 2 squads. That's great. Your Scrum Master might be one of the developers. I've seen that work as well. But what I've never seen work, and I'd recommend you never combine the Product Owner and Scrum Master roles. And the reason for that is there needs to be, and there ought to be, a really nice tension between the product owner and the development team. The Scrum Master is there to shield and protect that development team, particularly to protect their time. So there's a natural tension between the product owner who wants to maximize the value of the development team and the development team who wants to sustain its pace. And that's a good, healthy tension in any project. And the Scrum Master needs to balance the needs of the team against the needs of the product owner. And I find that by combining those roles, you lose that tension and the product owner takes over and the Scrum Master role gets a little bit lost. So lastly, the last role, this isn't an official part of Scrum, but everybody else in our organization, they are stakeholders in our project. In this case, it's the Joker who's throwing the money at the project. So he's the project sponsor. Stakeholders represent everybody else who's got an interest, whether that's the sponsor, whether that's a senior stakeholder who runs a department, or your users in the organization. They do a couple of things for you. Obviously, they provide your requirements to the product backlog. They don't get to prioritize those requirements. That's not their job, but they get to suggest new ideas and give you feedback. And they can observe any of your Scrum events, especially the sprint review where we do want their feedback. And sometimes they pop into my daily Scrums as well, but they should not be active participants. So if they want to contribute something towards the end, then we invite them to, but we make sure they're not interrupting the work of the Scrum team in those events. Product sprint backlogs are visible, whether that's through Azure DevOps as a system that they can log into and see some of those progress boards, or whether you're just printing out charts and posters and putting them up around the office or sending them reports. Make sure that you're being transparent with them. Make sure you're being honest about your progress so that they know exactly where you are. And they're on top of all the risks and issues that you're trying to manage as well. What we're trying to avoid there is the last minute crunch that often comes in the development phase of a traditional project where you're way behind schedule and nobody knows until it becomes the start of the testing phase and suddenly only half the features are built and the testing phase gets crunched because we're trying to extend the development phase and we're going to run out of budget. Lastly, the second tip is don't let them control the product owner. Certainly they can influence, they can lobby, and they can request features from the product owner, but even the chief executive officer, it's not his or her job to prioritize the requirements. That's the job of the product owner. So none of your stakeholders are in control. They have to come through the product owner if they want to make changes to the course that we're taking in the Scrum project. So let's have a look at the 3 different deliverables in a Scrum project when we're implementing Dynamic CRM. The first one is the product backlog. So product backlog is a list of all the possible requirements. We're never going to implement them all. The highest priority items are all at the top, and that's the job of the product owner and nobody else. It's their job alone to make sure that they assess the value of each requirement and they prioritize the high value requirements at the top. So it's a big ordered list. A couple of recommendations for managing your project backlog in a Dynamics project. I love using user stories and user story mapping to manage my requirements. So user stories are an agile practice born out of the extreme programming method, XP. And really, it's just a small index card that describes from the viewpoint of a user role what the value is that they will get from implementing a particular feature. And it's really nice and simple to write. The product owner can write them, your users can write them, and then your development team can analyze and implement those. Those user stories can be visualized in 2 dimensions using a user story map, and that's a great way for visualizing your entire product backlog. So those are 2 practices I would recommend, user stories and user story mapping. When it comes to estimating and planning, I recommend using story points and planning poker. So a story point is just a relative estimate of effort or complexity for each user story. And we use a Fibonacci sequence there, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. So that allows us to estimate the effort it's going to take to implement any particular user story. And we come up with those estimated story points in a gamified workshop called Planning Poker, in which the development team sit around, and it's only the development team who get to estimate the effort. And we do that in a session called Planning Poker, where nobody gets to see anybody else's cards. We all reveal our estimates together, and we negotiate why somebody thinks it's a 3 and somebody else thinks it's a 5 until we come up with a group consensus. What I don't recommend, use cases were pretty fashionable maybe 10 years ago, and they are quite a long, complex scenario-based way of describing a requirement. I think those are a little bit too long to work with in a short time frame, like a week or two in a Scrum project. So they're a little bit too long, a little bit too technical to write, and they often can't be written by our stakeholders. They can't be written by our product owner. So I don't recommend using use cases, and I definitely try and avoid writing any kind of requirement specification. I love user stories because they can be written on an index card or in a short form in a requirements management system like Azure DevOps. We try and avoid printing those out. If we need to, we can link to a richer description, maybe some wireframes in a wiki, but I don't recommend publishing any kind of requirement specification and getting it signed off. Stay agile, stay nice and fluid with your user stories, and use that to manage your product backlog. So the next deliverable that the team works on then is the sprint backlog. So this is a slice of work, normally the highest set of value requirements, and the dev team is going to forecast or going to commit to delivering those in this sprint. So it's a subset of the product backlog with a plan for how the work will be done. We take each of those user stories and their acceptance criteria, and we imagine how we're going to implement them. Is it going to require a workflow process, or are we going to use flow? Does that need a new entity, or can we reuse an existing system entity? Those kind of technical decisions are noted on the back of the card as well. All of the work in the sprint backlog is summarized with a sprint goal. That provides us a kind of theme for all of the user stories in that sprint. Great sprint goals do provide that unifying theme. Terrible sprint goals just say, oh, implement all the stories that we've selected for this sprint. So try and find that good theme that you can work towards and have a singular sprint goal that you could describe in a single sentence. A couple of tips for your sprint backlog. Try and resist changing it mid-sprint. There'll always be an emergency. There'll be a Sev1 bug that comes up, and we give ourselves a little bit of capacity for managing those emergency requests. And occasionally, we might need to swap out a story that we can't complete in this sprint, and we finish early when we bring in another story from the top of the sprint backlog, from the top of the product backlog mid-sprint, but really we try and resist changing it. A wholesale change to the entire set of stories that are in our sprint backlog, we'd call that a cancelled sprint. We'd scrap the whole thing and we'd start again. And we've seen the product backlog, it's owned by the product owner. The sprint backlog is owned by the dev team. So it's the dev team that gets to decide what stories from the top of the product backlog they're going to take into the sprint backlog. And there might be a reason why they select a story that doesn't have as much business value, but maybe it's got some technical dependency that they need to work on first before they can implement those higher value user stories. So it's the dev team that gets to decide, and they also get to decide how to implement things as well. So the technical decisions are left up to the developers. And then the last deliverable in a Scrum project is our working software. We call it the product increment. So this should be a set of usable software features that are ready to release into production. By usable software, we mean it's been tested already. So if it's gone through SIT and UAT, so that's systems integration testing and user acceptance testing, that's ideal. And it's ready to release into production. I love to release into production at the end of every sprint. And that's one of the tips you can see there. But first of all, I would encourage you to automate everything. So that means we need to implement DevOps practices so that we can deploy working software into production at the end of every sprint. So I use a concept in Dynamics 365 called item solutions and release solutions. So an item solution is those solution components that I need to satisfy a single user story. That could be just a single field, or it could even be just a new option set value in an option set. That's all that would be in my item solution. The item solution would have the same name as the story ID in my requirements management system. And the description of my solution would be the description of the story as well. So that means I've got lots and lots of little item solutions in my development instance, and I package those up into a release solution. So at the end of the sprint, if I'm going to release into the next instance in my development pipeline, that might be the test instance, then I package all the item solutions up that have been unit tested, and I combine those into a release solution. And I've got some code for doing that. So the release solution combines all the item solutions that have been successfully tested, packages them up, and deploys them in my test environment. Those release solutions can be managed or unmanaged, depending upon your preferences. And I encourage, like I said, I encourage my team to take a DevOps approach and automate as much of that as possible. Automate our unit testing, automate our acceptance testing, automate our deployments so that all of that can be streamlined and done in a couple of minutes rather than traditionally where it might take a couple of weeks of testing and rehearsal before we can get into production. So what I want is to release into production at the end of every sprint. Now, it's the product owner's decision about whether or not that happens. And I do admit that sometimes we can bombard our users with a lot of change if we keep changing their software every couple of weeks. So we have to be selective about the features that we put into that release. And one thing I try and do is to target different groups of users with the features in each release so that a particular set of users aren't seeing changes every 2 weeks. They're maybe seeing enhancements to their software every couple of months instead. But really being able to release into production every sprint reduces the time it takes between having a great idea and seeing it as a valuable feature in your Dynamics 365 system. So let's take a look at the Scrum events. There's 5 events in Scrum. The first one of those is a sprint. So a sprint is a time-boxed iteration of work when we turn ideas into features. We do all the analysis, design, development, integration, testing, and deployment work in every sprint, ideally. The Scrum Guide says that sprints are between a week and a month long. My recommendation for your Dynamics 365 projects, I've seen 2-week sprints work really well. I've seen 3-week sprints work really well. I've also seen 1-week sprints work well for short projects. Maybe if you want to do some kind of proof of concept project that's 8 or 12 weeks long, I've seen 1-week sprints work really well for those. And unless you've got a lot of automation and you're a very mature Scrum team, working at that pace can be quite a challenge. But I've often seen mature teams shorten the length of their sprint from 3 weeks down to 2 weeks, heading towards 1 week, if they can get that level of automation up so that they're freed up to focus on the software development. I'd recommend starting out with 2-week sprints. What I don't recommend is using any kind of special sprint. So my goal at the end of every sprint is to have software that's ready to release into production. I've heard of people using something called Sprint Zero. The goal of Sprint Zero is to have that initial product backlog identified. For me, that's not any working software. We haven't produced anything in Dynamics at that stage, so I don't want to call that a sprint. By all means, do that kind of pre-project discovery work. Just call it a discovery phase or initiation phase or product backlog refinement stage. But your Scrum project hasn't started at that stage. I also try and avoid things like hardening sprints, testing sprints, integration sprints. They're all BS. They don't produce any working software. We just need to focus on the same kind of sprint every sprint, where we do analysis, design, development, testing, and release. So deliver working software in every sprint. I dare you. The first workshop in each sprint is the sprint planning workshop. It's the event that kicks off every sprint. For a 2 or 3 week sprint, it's maybe 2 or 3 hours long. And the purpose is for the development team to select those high value items that are going to go into the sprint backlog and to come up with a plan for how those are going to be implemented. My top tips for sprint planning: I encourage a practice called story time. In the sprint before this sprint planning workshop, we hold story time workshops. This is where we refine the high-value user stories and make sure they all have acceptance criteria, that everybody understands them, and that the development team has estimated them. So the short workshops where we collaborate with the product owner and the dev team, any stakeholders and subject matter experts, we invite them in as well. And those are 1 hour or 2 hour workshops that we hold in the sprint prior to the sprint planning workshop. Be negotiable in sprint planning. The dev team needs to trust the product owner has done her job of prioritizing the highest value items. And the product owner needs to trust the dev team when it selects which of the highest priority items it's going to work on. Mature teams will have a practice of paying down what's known as technical debt. Technical debt is those features that you've implemented that when you look back on, there's a better way of doing it. So it might be code that needs to be refactored, or it might be a feature and you go, oh, I wish we'd done it differently. And sometimes the team needs to be trusted by the product owner to be given enough time to go away and reduce that technical debt. By reducing technical debt, we keep the system at its optimum state, and we reduce the complexity of the system to make it easier to maintain and support and enhance in the future. The daily Scrum is the next event. This happens, but if you can tell by the name, this happens every day during the course of the sprint. So we get together for 15 minutes. It's time boxed. We don't let it run for 16 minutes. And the purpose of the daily Scrum is for the dev team to get together and sync their work. Usually we explain what we achieved yesterday, what we're going to try and achieve today, and we describe any impediments that are getting in our way. And it's the Scrum Master's job to go away and try and knock over those impediments. I find that by focusing on what we achieved yesterday, and rather than what we did yesterday, people describe the work that they've done in order to try and meet the sprint goal. If we say, what did you do yesterday? People say, oh, I was in a design meeting and I had a workshop with the product owner. Well, that's interesting, but that wasn't really going to advance us towards the sprint goal. So by focusing on what we achieved, we tend to discuss the features that we implemented yesterday and the features that we're going to work on today. A couple of recommendations for the daily Scrum. Make sure we meet at the same time and same place every day. There's no excuses for being late. We start on time, we finish on time. If we need to hold any side conversations, we can do that after the daily Scrum. But we try not to get distracted and chase after issues in that daily Scrum. It's not a problem-solving session. We can hold those afterwards. My current Scrum Master hands out a jellyfish card if we're getting distracted, because jellyfish just tend to drift with the current and get carried off into places they didn't want to go. So jellyfish means stick to the topic and focus on the daily Scrum. And it's important that although the product owner is welcome and the Scrum Master is usually there, it's not a status report. The development team aren't reporting their progress to either of those two people. They're syncing with each other. It's for their benefit that they're holding the daily Scrum. And the daily Scrum happens even if the product owner can't make it, and if the Scrum Master can't make it for whatever reason either. The team should want to and get value from its daily Scrum every day. Next up is the sprint review. This is almost the final workshop towards the end of the sprint. And it's a really critical event for inspection and adaptation. So we're going to inspect the product increment that the team has delivered. That usually takes the form of a demo. Here you can see my development team demonstrating the latest version of Dynamics 365 to the product owner on a nice big screen. And what we're doing there is adapting the product backlog in response to feedback that we're getting from the stakeholders or from the product backlog. The sprint review should be no more than 2 to 3 hours. Most of my sprint review workshops are actually much shorter than that. Even if it's a 2 or 3 week sprint that I'm running, 1 or 2 hours is normally sufficient. A couple of tips for running your sprint review. I would encourage you to schedule recurring meetings. Sprint review, in my case, needs the conference room. Right? It's a really hard room to secure, so we try and book it months in advance. It's the same Tuesday morning every other week, so it's in everybody's calendars, particularly our stakeholders, so that they know exactly when they can come along and see the latest features and give us their feedback. Make sure you demonstrate Dynamics 365 in such a way that you are encouraging their feedback. Particularly when developers are demonstrating features, we get excited, we get carried away, and we forget to stop after each feature is demonstrated and ask our stakeholders what they think. How could we improve it? Are there any refinements that we need to make in the next sprint with regards to that feature? So stop, pause, take a breath, and ask for feedback. A couple of things not to do. Don't surprise your product owner. Your product owner should have seen all these features during the course of the sprint. I recommend previewing the features early and often with the product owner so they can make refinements during the course of development, so that there's no surprises when it comes to sprint review. And ideally, after a couple of sprints, it's your product owner who's doing the demos. In my case, my product owner often starts out not knowing how to use Dynamics 365 at all. But after a couple of sprints, they've been working in the project for a couple of months, they've seen it quite a lot, they've been playing with it, they've done some training on it, and it's the product owner who's going to demonstrate the features to his or her stakeholders. That's an awesome state to get to. I've seen teams prepare excessively for a sprint review. I don't know whether it's nerves or a poor state of their demo environment, but they might spend a day preparing demo data, migrating all the new features across to that demo environment, rehearsing it, doing handoffs between different development team members. Try and avoid all of that. It should take you an hour, maybe 2 at most. I'd recommend having one team member do all the demos, or the product owner if he or she is ready, and don't keep swapping people, because it gets a little bit distracting with the changeover. So you shouldn't take more than an hour to deploy your features to a demo environment. The demo data should already be there, and you're ready to go at any time. And then finally, the last event and the last topic we're going to cover in this presentation is the sprint retrospective. The sprint retrospective is now a chance to inspect and adapt your processes. It usually takes about an hour, and I would focus on making it a walking meeting, or get out and have a picnic, something to break up and delineate one sprint from the next. Make sure you do focus on processes, not the people. A great question to ask is, how can we apply test-driven development to our project? Not, how can we get Batman to do more regression testing? Take 1 or 2 ideas and act on those in the next sprint. Don't come up with 25 great things you'd love to change about your process and then do none of them. Have 1 or 2 team members commit to taking on 1 or 2 actions and implementing those in the next sprint. And finally, change the format from one sprint retrospective to another. So there's different ways of running the sprint retrospective. A common way of running it is to discuss what we did well and what we want to keep doing, what we want to start doing, any new practices we should adopt, and anything that wasn't working and things that we should stop doing. So that, what should we start? What should we keep? What should we stop? It's a common format, but there's lots of others. Change it up every couple of sprints. Maybe bring an external Scrum Master in to run your sprint retrospective to give you a new perspective on how your team is working. So it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you today, chatting through how to successfully use the Scrum framework to implement Dynamics 365. If you do have any questions for me, there's lots of different ways to reach out. I'd be happy to help. Thanks, Pervin. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, we do actually have some questions live.
Great.
All right. Randy Garrett has actually several, so I'm just going to kind of run through them and let you mold them if you want to answer them right now or later. But what types of roles do you typically see as product owners in a Dynamics 365 Scrum implementation? C-level, business analyst, are the C-level individuals close enough to the business to make product decisions?
Great question, Randy. Thank you. Debbie was the COO. I think in the UK, they call it an operations director. So she was that kind of C-level board executive, and she was the product owner. However, she had a business analyst, Ben, who was a right-hand man, and he was the person she had delegated most of the requirement writing responsibility to. Debbie was still heavily involved. She sat with us a couple of days a week, but we had a limited amount of time with her, maybe a couple of hours during the course of each sprint, and then for those workshops at the start and the end of each sprint, because she was busy running the operations of the entire organization. So that's great if you can get somebody who's that senior. But like I said, one of the challenges is that senior people tend to be the ones that don't have the capacity. So you might want to use a proxy in that case. However, I would encourage you not to find somebody who is available who doesn't have that senior decision-making authority. So you have to get that right balance. In a sales automation project, it might be the head of sales operations or somebody in a kind of a back office sales role rather than the head of sales.
His next question, in your case study, you stated it took 39 sprints and 18 months. Did the client expect this, and what expectations did the client have for completion date and the number of sprints? I have a feeling I know what the answer is here.
Yeah, so I use an estimation technique at the start of the project. So we have our user stories are described in epics, which is just a big user story. So we chunk all of our requirements up into epics, and there might be 12, there might be 100 epics in our roadmap. And we estimate those roughly. How long is it going to take? How many sprints is it going to take for each of those? So we do get a rough idea of how many sprints our project is going to last. And then if we're making changes to the scope by adding new requirements, then it's up to the product owner to prioritize those requirements and say, hey, look, that's never going to get funded. We're going to finish the project after 10 sprints or 100 sprints, whatever your budget affords. So the product owner is in control of that. And it's up to the development team to help the product owner forecast what's going to be done and by when, so they can make those decisions.
And the last question, in your statement of work for a Scrum project, do you completely ignore scope, or is SOW basically an X number of sprints and then you change order for more sprints if needed? What challenges have you faced with this?
Oh, so I'll share a story of what went wrong in the Premier Medical Group a pitch. So we had the board of directors there. We had a venture capitalist from Nomura who was providing the money to the company. And he said, look, Neil, if we're going to set aside that requirement specification, that 600-page FRD that you produced, if we're no longer going to work to that, how will we know when you're done? A very fair question. He's putting up, millions of dollars to back this company. Some of that money is going to be spent on my development team. He's absolutely right. He wants to know what he's going to get for his money and how he's going to hold us to account. And I said something that I regret, and I would encourage you never to say in your pitch to your board of directors. And I said, you'll know when we're done when you run out of money. That's not the right answer. So the correct answer, the correct answer is there's going to come a point in time when the value that you're getting out of the new features is less than the value of running that team. So that's the point at which you give us notice, we pack up and we go home. So the statement of work for a Scrum project, typically, like Randy said, there's a fixed cost per sprint because we know who's on the project, what their costs are. And if there's 10 people and they're $1,000 a day, then that's $10,000 per day. And there's 2 weeks in a sprint, so that's $100,000 per sprint. So we can fix those costs, and the organization can then budget accordingly. So the statement of work just says, hey, these 10 people are awesome. They're going to turn up and do great work. They're going to be directed by your product owner, so we don't know what they're going to work on. But roughly, together, we've agreed this initial product backlog comprised of these epics. And your product owner has the right to change that set at any time. So it takes a little bit of negotiation and some trust. So quite often in my initial statements of work, they're just for 1 or 2 sprints, just to get a bit of comfort between the two parties that the product owner is the right kind of person that we can trust as a bunch of developers, and that they can trust us to deliver great software at the end of each sprint. So maybe a proof of concept project to get you going, and part ways if it doesn't work out.
Absolutely. Setting expectations early on, because a lot of people are expecting more of a waterfall type approach is key.
Sure. Yep. One of the great things is if you do part ways, then your client, the Microsoft customer organization, has some working software after just 1 or 2 sprints. They may not have got on with the development team, but they've got some working software out of it. If that was a traditional project and a team came in to do the requirements analysis and that didn't work out, well, all you've got is half a requirement specification. That's much less valuable than some working software.
Absolutely. Well, that covers at least all the questions that I saw online. So again, you see all the ways to contact Neil. I think we should let Neil go to sleep. He definitely has also some young kids that I'm sure they're going to wake him up at some point. So thank you so much, Neil, for coming out and doing this. I actually am a big fan of this presentation. That's why I wanted to have you on here. For anyone that wants to contact Neil after the fact, please do. And we will certainly have more and more webinars on our Dynamics 365 channel covering all sorts of aspects of Dynamics 365.
Thanks, Pervin. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Neil. Have a good day, everyone.